Here we are 6 years into democracy, don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. So I think that's where it sort of came from. We wanted to create a technology organization that create linkages between all the science institutions. I think there was about 9 of them at the time, the likes of CSR, MRC, and so forth, Human Science Research Council, and so forth.
Hello and welcome once again to yet another episode of The Truth in Development. This is a podcast powered by the Ntiyiso Consulting Group, and today I get to know the people, the personalities behind the organization. We are going to be speaking to Mr. Andisa Ramavunga, who is the Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Welcome to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us this evening once more.
Thank you, Aubrey. It's great to be here.
And of course, Mr. Miyelani Holeni, also Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Thank you, sir, for joining us this evening.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Much appreciated. And of course, the Group CEO, Mr. Alex Mabunda. Thank you, sir, for joining us this evening. Much appreciated.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
So one of the things that we discussed in the previous episode was what is Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Today, I want to get to know you, gentlemen. I want to know where Ntiyiso Consulting comes from as a concept, and who are the people that were pregnant of this baby 18 years ago, and why. How did the conception happen? I'm sorry to be using that kind of imagery, but you understand where I'm going. Where and when did Ntiyiso Consulting start? By whom?
Yeah, so maybe before I get to that question, let me just say Ntiyiso Consulting Group is a management consulting firm. We are based out in Pretoria, in Centurion. And yes, as you did say, we are a business of 18 years today. So we started in 2005. And over the years, we have grown into a group that has 3 subsidiaries. Combined of which, support our value proposition, which is to unlock development. We have a subsidiary on the revenue consulting, on industrialization consulting, as well as business consulting. And as I said, these 3 subsidiaries, they support our value proposition out there, which is to unlock development. Now, coming to your question, yes, we were registered in 2005, and I'm using that word registered, deliberately, because the whole concept of what Ntiyiso Consulting is and what it stands for.
That is a birth certificate.
And that birth certificate is a close corporation.
Yes.
Wow. That birth certificates comes after other processes
of course.
taken place. So, as it were, I think as early as, the early 2000s, having finished varsity and maybe very pregnant with ideas, we immediately saw that something was not right in our community, and specifically that there's a need to create industries that will support development as part of us ushering ourselves into the then new dispensation.
Well, was it the idea that you guys wanted to create an industry? I mean, were you thinking along those lines, industrial terms, or was it just an idea that we want to see something like this change in our community?
Yeah, so of course, the anchor for the idea was that here we are 6 years thereabout, because I think 2000, that's where the whole thing sort of started. Here we are 6 years into democracy, don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. So I think that's where it sort of came from. We wanted to create a technology organization that create linkages between all the science institutions. I think there was about 9 of them at the time, the likes of CSR, MRC, and so forth, Human Science Research Council, and so forth. Tech for the mining, and then all the universities to then exploit, research based on our endowments, whether it's cultural, natural, social, historical, and so forth, to then create multiple industries, to answer your question. And then, of course, a whole lot of things were done to mobilize government back then to fund this initiative. And, of course, it failed, as it were. And this is when now in 2005, having been party to that whole thing, I had the privilege of registering Ntiyiso Consulting. And of course, there's a partner whom I think will appear in one of the podcasts, Anthony Mkwanazi. This is the gentleman that we had these lofty ideas about how development can be fostered. And then Ntiyiso Consulting was born in 2005. I personally left my then employment at Unilever to do this work, and then invited Anthony into the company. And then, of course, 5, 6, 7 years, the true anchors of the business came to the picture, and these are the two partners that are here. And I think that's when Ntiyiso Consulting took a whole new form that has brought it to be the group that it is today.
Mielani, when you came into the fold, as it were, what was it that you think was your contribution towards making it what it now is? And with previous conversations that I've had with all three of you, it feels to me like Ntiyiso Consulting hasn't arrived, that Ntiyiso Consulting is about the journey and not the destination. Would that be true? But I'm interested about what was going on when you arrived in this family.
So, in essence, I think I arrived before I arrived. If I may put it in those terms, I had to think very carefully about how to phrase that one. Because in essence, my arrival was predated. And I think it had maybe a post-dated, a letter or envelope to it. But, there was a predating where everyone finds, Alex very interesting, I must say. Whenever people, meet Alex, he's got a striking, looks about him and so on and so forth. And I think it's good that, I relate, the story of how, the meeting, took place, so that we can at least give context to what, we found, or I found at Ntiyiso Consulting. So one evening, we get invited to a 50th birthday.
One evening.
Under the skies of Johannesburg. And, I was working at the Ekurhuleni Metro at that stage. And when I went there, it was on the behest of my chief financial officer, who was running the finances of the city of Ekurhuleni, who in some ways, had relations, with Alex. And little did I know, it's something that, just kind of unfolded there. And we got introduced to each other, I can still remember what his hair looked like. I can still remember the shoes he was wearing. In fact, the boots he was wearing.
Yeah.
I can still remember the jeans he was wearing. So quite an eccentric character. And I looked at this tall figure and they said, Alex Mavunda. Never seen him before. But, something about him that, was quite, interesting, that at least, from the contact with Ntiyiso Consulting, took place. But maybe rewind, a little bit. Andisa and I, in the blue suits that we're wearing, I think we used to dress, very similarly to the way that we are dressed today, because we're working for a blue bank, which maybe for obvious reasons will not advertise, that much. But it's Standard Bank. I think, it's something that, is a great South African story. He was in credit, I was in product. So he was finding reasons, to decline, the loans and the student loans and the overdrafts and whatever to protect the assets of the bank. And on my side, I was selling and wanting to make sure that everyone who walks around as a revolving credit plan, everyone who walks around as a student loan, and so on and so forth. And I think that's where the relations, kind of come in, because that is what we took, I think, when we came into Ntiyiso Consulting. At that stage, my background was always in the, I had started, in other industries, but the latest industry that I was in, or at least sector of the economy, was local government. So essentially, I think that is what when I came on board to Ntiyiso Consulting, local government was a burning platform at that stage. It was had gone through a lot of mutations, from its formation, and also understanding that local government always existed in South Africa, but in two forms, or in two different, sides of the coin, because there would have been the authorities, local authorities, that were looking after the white towns, and there were always the other, authorities that were looking after the black towns, and now you have an amalgamation of the two, and one found themselves at the center of that, and I guess when my arrival at Ntiyiso Consulting was to bring in the local government aspect, because that was one of the cogs that we were later, and we are learning at times, and we have learned and we have understood now the importance of local government as a collective, or as a form of sphere of government, but more as an autonomous sector of government, because local government is the only one that self-governs, and it's the only one that has its own elections. Provincial and national have their own, are combined, in the elections of the country, and so on and so forth. So if you think of local government, think about, this is a sphere that needs its own elections, or at least, a sector in the ballot box, that deals with its own elections. So that is the practice of local government that, we brought in. And we saw that, for us to realize, all of the different dreams, we also need to contribute to fixing local government, because at that stage, I think there was misdiagnosis, there was overdiagnosis, there was underdiagnosis, the prognosis, and often, I'll say this very controversially, that, some of the things that were prescribed as solutions were worse than the problems themselves. So it's like going to a doctor and you get, given medicine that is worse than the disease that, you displayed. Guess what will happen to you? It will complicate even further. So that is the discourse, I think, of what Mielan Holeni into Ntiyiso Consulting was seeking to bring as a contribution that would create the rest of the value propositions. In fact, the value proposition which would say revenue within local government. And of course, revenue is an entry point, because we have to touch now the entire sphere of government.
That's why you're in business. CE says that you and Mielani Holeni are fundamentally the anchors of the building, of the business. That you are the people that gave the business, I suppose, for lack of a better word, the structure that it is now, right? What is it about you, do you think, was responsible for taking the organization forward? As you tell us, how you got to know about these group of guys, and why do you think you decided you were going to be part of this quest?
Yeah. So I view myself as but one of the cogs that works within in Ntiyiso Consulting. Maybe let me explain my venturing into Ntiyiso Consulting. I got a call from a colleague, Umielani, saying you need to meet this guy. There's this project that's happening, and that call came at the time where I was running my own small boutique consulting firm. But my main job was a business that I had founded with another partner in the broadcasting space. By the way, I was not very interested in doing a lot of consulting at the time, and it sounded as if what Mielani was proposing was a whole lot of consulting. And before that, by the way, he had come, I think this would have been the second or third consulting gig that me and him were doing. This is post our Standard Bank days, by the way. So we do this very opportunistic consulting gig. So when you call, I'm like, hey, Mielani and his stuff, these things are time consuming. But because I have got the utmost risk, because I did view him as an elder from our way back, I'm like, okay, I'll entertain this. But it was my way maybe of trying to brush him off. Then I get a call. I don't think I treated it with the seriousness that it deserved. But safe to say, fast forward, and then I meet Alex, and we were sitting at News Cafe at the time. I mean, it was
That's
Would
the
be.
place to be.
in the Woodmead.
Yeah.
In the Woodmead.
It was a place to be.
So, and we discussed a project, and I must say, I got hooked immediately, because the project was about a breed of technology, but not only technology, there's a heavy consulting base. It was really cutting edge at the time, and I thought, oh, and the way that Alex sold it as well, is that it's not going to take a lot of hours. I don't know whether he was selling it to me, trying to convince me, because we did end up spending quite a lot of sleepless nights doing that project. But I guess what then attracted me to Ntiyiso Consulting at the time, one was obviously the risk we were willing to take to prove that solutions work and deliver the value to the client. That was the hooker. But I think what has kept me in is more the spirit of partnership and brotherhood. I think that became apparent, because obviously you don't know these things when you're out, but when you found them in an organization, you tend to gravitate and stick. And I'm glad to say that that's probably the culture that is, to answer your question directly, and to say what has been my input to it, is this culture of hardworking culture, but a culture of trust, right? A culture that also respects that we are all different and commit different skill sets in the pot, right? I mean, I'll sum it up. In my mind, it's clear what role is it. I'm probably the most risk-averse person there is in the group. Milad is probably the most risk taker in the group, and the pivot is Alex in between, and that's how we balance each other. We debate stuff. I mean, we'll get into the details of stuff and debate it, but we'll always come to the answer. But what has kept me, I think, fascinating even for me to discover as I grow in the organization. I'm a career consultant. I've always been in management consulting. I've done work for major consulting houses, and for the same reason, I don't want to give them free advertising. But I've been privileged to do some of the most impactful work as a youngster. I've done some reorganization on SAA, done some initial planning work for ESCOM, the stuff that's impacting people now, some expansion for MTN into the OpCos, some decongesting of the ports, refocusing of the investment, really cutting edge stuff, right? Which I think if I was another consultant, it would have kept me in the mainstream of consulting at the time, because it was probably much more sexier and much more well respected. But what I particularly found interesting within Ntiyiso Consulting was the ability to humanize consulting, because at that point in time I did see that consulting has got a very, management consulting in particular, has a very big role to play in improving the lives of people. And at that time, again, I was caught between being a planning consultant and an implementing consultant. And you would have seen that a lot of the work I've explained to you was more planning work. I mean, some of them had practical implementation work, particularly the decongesting of the port, but most of it was planning work. So I saw Ntiyiso Consulting as this big arm that allows us to do both, to do very good planning, but also to see those plans to fruition. And I'm happy to say that I've yet to sit in fact, I've yet to think of any project we've done that has not had significant impact. So meaning that we do a lot of planning, but we do also facilitate the implementation. And I'm able in my lifetime to see the results, or at least the initial results of what I've been party to doing. So yeah, so it's been home. Home is exactly that. You don't need to. You gravitate towards it naturally.
Sure. I want to take a quick break, gentlemen, but I do want to get to understand some of the character traits. You've already touched on it, that keep you together, that have been the cementing factor to this team. because clearly there are different types of characters, and that's part of the reason why you've had the success that you've had. But I'm really looking to find out what those character traits are, where they emanate from. So I'm interested to find out where you come from. And how those character traits were developed. Please stay with us as we continue this conversation with the executives, the founders of the Ntiyiso Consulting Group, and I'm sure that we're going to learn a lot about their leadership style and their culture. Please stay with us.
The Ntiyiso Consulting Group is an authentically African and globally wide management consulting firm which seeks to empower institutions that enable Africa's development. This impact is delivered through 3 subsidiaries: Ntiyiso Revenue Consulting, Ntiyiso Business Consulting, and Ntiyiso Industrialization Consulting. Our team of over 200 consultants provides sustainable, evidence-based solutions to complex management problems and are subject matter experts in strategy, governance, organizational turnaround, revenue enhancement, and unlocking new economic streams for growth. Visit www.ntiyisoconsulting.co.za for more information. Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Truth, trust, results.
We continue in our conversation with the executives of the Ntiyiso Consulting Group, getting to know them as human beings. We are getting to understand what are the values, what are the principles that have created an organization that has lasted for 18 years in the developmental space. My guests, Andisa Ramabunga, who is the Group Chief Advisor, Mr. Mielani Holeni, Group Chief Advisor, and of course Alex Mavunda, the Group CEO. We were talking about how each of you got involved in this company. And one of the things that came out of the conversation, Alex, was the fact that you seem to be an eccentric kind of individual. Would you agree that you are an eccentric individual? I mean, references have been made about your look, about the kind of clothes that you wear, but you seem to lead a group of guys and girls in your organization that are very passionate, that know what they're talking about. How has your character contributed to the stabilization of an organization made up of Mielanis and Andisas?
Yeah, well, eccentric. Well, that's not how I think about myself. Maybe my looks a little bit, but yes, I know that my outlook of life is boundless. I'm a free-spirited thinker, not confined to any particular worldly.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that's part because you can see or you can look at Ntiyiso Consulting as a bird that's flying freely, in the skies, and reaching out for the next worm that it's seeing, and not be dragged or distracted or bound by any of the environment that it operates on. And I'm using this kind of metaphor because I come from a rural area. I went to a public school. I grew up in the ways of the villagers. I had cattle, I had goat before cattle. I swam in dirty streams. I made artistic, work in the bushes that children in those spaces do. I've had an exposure. My family owns a house in Soweto, so I spent some time in urban setting, and I think all of that diversity, of experiences, but also coming from a very low base, as it were, right, fuels the hunger to want to rise up and touch the skies, as it were. And I think that's what Ntiyiso Consulting is about. We talk about 18 years, but I'm looking and thinking that's very little of what we are. Much of what we really think we are is what's coming in the future.
It has been very clear in the conversations that I've had with all three of you that you are very comfortable with the idea that you are not a set, there's no set mindset that is that inhibits, I suppose, the fact that in the developmental space, in the space of coming up with ideas, in the space of being thinkers, that you've got to allow yourself that organic fluidity. That's what I'm interested about. Where does that come from?
Yeah, look, it's difficult to pinpoint. I do think, as I was at pain to allude, that maybe one's personal experiences of life, where you've seen the worst and possibly the best, influences this gung ho, won't be intimidated, won't price myself down, will name my number and will go get my number, and no one there, competes me and want to wrestle my number from me. So there's that, maybe some element of anger, a little bit, which I think if you are black and not angry, you're probably not black enough, So yeah, I guess it's difficult to get to a textual description of it, but I think the making, and I must say, in the past 10 or so years that I've met these two gentlemen, some of one's character traits has been anchored. I mean, these are very special breed of human beings who come with very unique strength and characters that I sometimes ask myself if you have any environment. I mean, I don't meet people and think, that's really a great guy. If I could have that guy as one of my partners, I can't ask for better partners. He's more of a structured thinker. The guy who draws up the plan, of a concept and show you all the corners that you would otherwise miss. And reduce you to appreciating, how things work in some form of a very logical, sort of a structured kind.
Do you think that you resonate with his character because you lack some of that structure?
Not necessarily, but, mine, I wouldn't say lack, more than, maybe my inclination is not some. I'm more on the artistic side, so to speak. But I think maybe what I'm not saying enough is that what Ntiyiso is anchored on, and I think it was sort of coming out from the previous segment, is us using first principle problem solving approach to attacking the problems that our clients brings to us. And that first principle problem solving approach, that's Ntiyiso, right? He's able to take a whole complex thing and cut it down into something so simple. And I think very few people have that talent. Absolutely. Right? I wouldn't count myself as one.
So one of the things that make an organization successful is because of that complementary sort of relationship that the leadership of an organization have. What is it about you, do you think, has made it easy for a leader like Alex to be able to lead? Because listening to him, he almost looks up to your intellect. It's almost like he sees you as being more endowed in terms of your intellect even than him. What do you think about you has contributed to that relative harmony?
Oprah, I think one thing though I think my partners are not underscoring is this issue that I spoke of trust, right? Because I mean, it's easy. Melanie, even Alex, they can easily say, "Hey, this man is full of himself. Check him out," right? I think we don't appreciate enough that element of trust, and I mean trust in a true sense, where you are free to be you, right, without having to worry about your own imperfections, because we all have blinkers and blind spots. I started mentioning that I'm probably the more risk-averse one. So I think if maybe it was only me in this business, we would have only been able to manage the growth that moved so far, right? He's probably the more risk-aggressive ones, the more bold one out of us. And I would argue that is probably the one who pushes the envelope most of the time, and most of us are probably behind him. Probably, I don't want to say cleaning up, but pitching. But it's that pull and push tension or it's difficult, I guess, answering that question directly to say what is it about me. I think one thing I do appreciate about myself, and I think the partners have articulated, is always think of myself in a systematic view, right? That says it just can't be me alone, right? Because I did say that I will probably be still a 5-man shop if it was just me. But it's more in the mixing. I think what we really are, if I were to boil it down, is we are a recipe for a good tasting cake, right? And you can't take away whether it's the icing or it's the flour or it's the egg.
Or the dough.
It's immaterial if we were to separate. It's really how you gel the things together that makes it tick. And the CEO is right. I've yet also to meet. In fact, I meet other partners, by the way, but I find enough pity them, in a sense, to say, Jesus Christ, you guys have a good thing going, but if we were to bring this thing here, I think it could be so much. And I meet a lot of people, and I say it not because I'm arrogant. It's because I do feel, and it's not about whether we are the cleverest or the most agile or maybe the most bold, right? It's more about, hey, we've got that unique formula to just generate stuff and make stuff tick and work. And wherever I meet other people, it's, hey, if we can bring this thing here, I do believe we can magnify it. I do believe, I sincerely believe in having, and I say this with humility because as I've mentioned, been in some of the top consulting firms, right? But I've yet to meet or be in an environment like this one, and maybe that's why I take it very personal sometimes when we don't meet our things, because I've not seen a winning formula. And I mean, I've only been working 20 years of my life. Maybe I'll see more, but I do still think that there's quite a lot that is sitting in here more as potential and rather than just manifesting. I mean, you said something. Sorry, Aubrey, before I stop earlier in your question to say you feel as if Ntiyiso is still sitting on that energy. I mean, a lot of people can look at. We have not arrived. I think those were the words we used. I'll tell you now. I laughed a bit when you said that with these guys, we'll never arrive. I can tell you that. The moment you think you are there, someone pushes that thing. I mean, there was a time where we had Swan and we thought we were a big thing. Already we were starting to think, Africa, what are we doing in Africa? What's capitals of this?
I want to stop you because I need to take a quick break. But I'm going to come back to you, Meelani, and talk about how what seems to be your most powerful character trait is the ability to see beyond the limitations of now. And I get a sense that that's why people see you as being more risk aggressive. I want to know where that vision comes from. And I also want to know where the energy to pull the anchoring energy of Alex, and of course the risk averse character trait of Andisa, how you are able to get energy to pull these people so that they push you. So there's a pull and push sort of relationship that you all have, but it produces the right speeds for the kinds of projects that you go after. I'm seeing that. I'm interested to find out where it comes from. How did it develop? And how do you calm yourself down? How do you slow yourself down? That's the question that is on my mind. Please stay with us as we get to know the executives, the founders of Ntiyiso Consulting Group after this.
The Ntiyiso Consulting Group is an authentically African and globally wide management consulting firm which seeks to empower institutions that enable Africa's development. This impact is delivered through 3 subsidiaries: Ntiyiso Revenue Consulting, Ntiyiso Business Consulting, and Ntiyiso Industrialization Consulting. Our team of over 200 consultants provides sustainable, evidence-based solutions to complex management problems and are subject matter experts in strategy, governance, organizational turnaround, revenue enhancement, and unlocking new economic streams for growth. Visit www.ntiyisoconsulting.co.za for more information. Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Truth, trust, results.
Welcome again as we continue to get to know the individuals, the power, the personalities behind the Ntiyiso Consulting Group. We've already heard from the Group CE, Mr. Alex Mavunda, and we've also heard from Andisa Ramavunga, one of the Group Chief Advisors. But one of the individuals that has been very interesting to hear about has been Mielani Holeni, who is described as the man who is the most risk aggressive in the organization. How do you respond to that description of yourself by your colleagues? Is it something that you take with stride, or is it something that you worry about sometimes?
Yeah, I think at times I actually never realized that, that is something that I represent or something that I bring. But I think, it stems from the background. My background, my mom and my dad ran businesses, when it was unfashionable in the 80s. In those days, I'm sure what they built would look like a shopping center because, it was a combination of a cafe, a tavern or a drinking lounge and a bottle store, and the infrastructure that went with it, to the point where at that stage the railway trucks used to transport, beer from SAB in Isando, and sometimes they would be late, so someone had to improvise and buy a truck and do all of those things. So I watched all of these things, them waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, driving another 100 kilometers to go and open their business, stock it up, and so on and so forth. And this was in the 80s, when I saw all of this. You see them, developing, growing, opening up, catering things and so on. So I always thought, that is how, things should be. So I watched, people who were go-getters, who were drivers, who never took no for an answer. And I guess, those things, in a way, you imbibe them or they become something in you. But I think an important point as well in terms of that kind of character is that, earlier we spoke about the thinkers. One thing we did not say is that, there's the thinker, there's the writer. And I think for me is I see myself more as the mouthpiece, as the speaker, and so on. But it takes, I think, if I may give this as an example, another thinker to appreciate another thinker.
Absolutely.
You see, so if you yourself are not in the thinking game, you won't be able to quite appreciate, someone whose thinking is at a particular level. But also, it also takes the humility to be able to receive, the thinking from someone. So I think, in all of us, we understand that this one, if you give him to go and speak, he will represent, what that idea is, because they would understand what they would say, from that speaking point of view. But this one is the right one to go and speak. This one is the right one to go and write, this, to pen this thing. This one is the right one to go and think about, all of these things. So I think within the collective, I think the character that, one brings, I'm able to do all of that because my partners understand that, this is how this person is wired. This is how I'm wired. For me, if there's no movement, I get really frustrated, when there's no movement, to the point where you have to restrain, to say, oh, and so on and so forth. But of course, what we also appreciate is that there are seasons, which we go through. So as well, if you take an ensemble, an orchestra ensemble, if everyone were to play whatever notes at any given point in time, or all at the same time, you probably would have the worst, musical production there. But you must actually know that, this is now the moment for the drum.
Timing, yeah.
And not just the drum, but the tenor drum. And not just, the tenor drum, but, and so on and so forth. So I think what we also have as a collective is to also know the seasons. Right now we are in the remembering season. Okay? In the previous, time we were in the growth phase, very aggressive, growth phase.
Right.
Which, you even if you took out the entire kitchen unit and threw at, this thing, it would make sense. But right now, it's about finessing the things that, so each one of our characters, come to the fore at different, times. And I think for us, it's not about, I want to be the shining star, but it's what must shine at this stage and who can make it shine, and so on. Because when it shines, it will twinkle in my eye and it will spawn, other things and reflect and so on and so forth. So I think that kind of a character is what, I guess, in our values we bring. So our values are crucial because we see our values in three sort of, segments or spheres. We see the values about how we carry ourselves.
Yes.
It's very important. How we carry ourselves. Okay. I have to be able to afford, a lot of respect, not a measure, a lot of respect to my partner. No matter what the circumstances are. We have to be able to start, from those principles of saying, I respect you, and you must know that I respect you. Therefore, what I utter is nothing of disdain, but it's something that, is going to build,
Sure.
or it's going to even change fundamentally what, and what you were thinking and how you were thinking about it. And all of us must be able to receive. And that's how we then move it into the organization, that the reception of ideas and all of that is not a shotgun or a rifle shooting that, is going to pierce through.
Yeah.
But there's thought in it. It may sound like a bullet that is hitting, but, remember that that bullet, if it doesn't hit, the direction may be altered and altered permanently. So I think that is the first way of how we carry ourselves is important. Respect, support for one another, and so on. So, and the other segments, is around, how, we are as individuals when it comes, to working, how we treat our work. The last one is about how we treat our clients, and so on and so forth. But that demeanor of how we carry ourselves, how we think about our work, and how we think about, our client, as well as, the innovative part of it, and so on, is important because it allows this whole, if I may call ourselves an orchestra, to be in tune and to produce the kind of song or products and delivery that, a client would say, that resonates with us. Okay.
One of the people that has been a founder of the organization is Mr. Anthony Mkhwanazi. He's not here, but I suppose him not being here is also indicative of the kind of person he is. He sounds to me like the guy who plays in the background more than perhaps the foreground. Tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward, by the way, to the day I have a chat with him.
Yes, he ran away from one of he ran away from one of the podcasts. Yeah. So when I was giving the history of the firm, I spoke about the years around 2000 to 2005 before the actual registration of the firm. And this whole thing. I
remind you that you described it as all of the stuff that happens before
birth.
The birth, by the way.
Yes, yeah. So Anthony was very instrumental in that phase of our development. When I say development, because also this is us, right? I mean, in 2000, one would have been about 30 years old, but you continue to grow. Anthony's background, he studied chemical engineering. We went together at Wits. That's, I can tell, it's one of the most difficult courses you can pull there. Cut his teeth in the CSIR, which is what exposed him to this whole idea of what science and innovation and technology can do to development. And Anthony is a very fast and ardent learner. He has an eye for things when he gets exposed to situations and information and so forth. So he came up with this whole idea. And I think, from my end, I think I have a way to take something, and maybe amplify it and give it, sound, as it were. And we worked with some other people, but by 2004 we had given up on this whole thing because it was just not coming together. But in my quiet space, I just was never happy, having an unsuccessful gig. And that's when I took the risk, left Unilever, and registered Ntiyiso Consulting. And then in 2006, just barely a year and a bit after the company started, one of the people that we had been talking about this whole thing of industrialization, which was the DTI, came back to us and said, hey guys, that whole thing that you presented to us about a year and a bit ago, are you still interested? And that's where we got this funding to set up our factory. And of course, at that time, I could only look one direction, and that was Anthony. But he couldn't come and work directly in the firm. So he was sort of doing some moonlighting with us over the years. And I think 3 years ago, we then said, now it's time we go back to our first love. Sure. 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 years ago. So I think, to also sum up, Anthony, I think is that guy that is almost a steward, almost like, I don't know how to put it, in the right, English, word, but it's someone who cares, about, the detail, the small details, right, and patiently pulls them together. When you think, this thing is not going to work, he surprises you because he spends time with the detail and has got such an amazing appreciation of the detail to be able to pull things together, as opposed to saying, this thing I give up. It's like a rubrics. A lot of us give up, with the rubrics. Right. So it's that guy that can turn a rubrics, to the point where, it comes back and quietly gives it to you.
Magic cubes.
Yeah. It just comes back and gives it to you, and you'll be surprised that, you've now got, this thing. So I think, I tried to describe, earlier that, he thinks, he writes, I speak, he's stewards. So that's the kind of things that, and the
it appears as though the leadership of Ntiyiso Consulting, and I imagine the rank and file of Ntiyiso Consulting, is made up of this kind of eclectic mix of different personalities, different levels of the love of detail, different levels of aggression, different levels of averseness to, shall we say, to risk. If you, just the three of you, very shortly, because we have to close, were to describe Ntiyiso Consulting as a woman, as a person, as a man, as a child, what would Ntiyiso Consulting look like? If I walked past and there was an individual, what would that individual look like? And their name was Ntiyiso Consulting. Andisa?
Yeah, so to me, Ntiyiso would be an elderly African woman. Very wise but modern in thinking, a strong disciplinarian, but also very loving, cares about his community, cares about her community, goes beyond the call of being a parent, the call of duty to get things done. Because the well-being of her children, the well-being of the community is of such paramount importance to her that she will do anything to make that happen.
Yelani, what would Ntiyiso Consulting look like to you?
I think exactly that. I think the word a nurturer, a carer, but also someone who has energy. Okay, I think in one of the ways that we describe the person of Ntiyiso, ironically Ntiyiso Consulting, so the surname is Consulting. but in essence, lots of energy. Someone that has to invest in making sure that energy does not run dry, but also not misdirected, because I think the wisdom part is the part that we seek to always harness. So when you think you've seen it, you've heard it, it's been written and all of that, we want to come back with the insights. So it is that old lady that sits back, and I think for me is I will gravitate. I'm not so much of an artist or a musician, but my desire, it's think of the drums. Some great musician talks about the big drum, which is it's a slow drum that imparts values. Gudu, gudu, gudu becomes the base of it. So that the female or the mother drum is the one, in fact, that heralds the children. It creates a pace at which things must happen. So that old wise woman, in a way, gravitating, but creating the values, imparting the values, setting the pace of how things must happen, when they must happen, how they must happen, and when mistakes are made, comes back and corrects, guides, and so on. So I think the personification of Ntiyiso being an old wise woman who has exceptional capabilities, can even make rain to rain.
A rainmaker.
A rainmaker, can be a rain queen.
As we close, Alex, I've come to get to know Ntiyiso through the three of you and to hear a little bit more about Bra Anthony. What is it about Ntiyiso, as we close, culturally carries the organization such that it is relevant in a technologically progressive environment, but also an environment that requires a lot of progressive development, but also that requires a lot of understanding and generosity of spirit? And I'm describing Africa here for you, that we have innovation as far as technology is concerned right here. We have historical issues that we need to handle sensitively, that we have all of these issues that we need to deal with. Culturally, how does Ntiyiso Consulting Group respond to those challenges as we close?
Yeah, so we say we are an Afrocentric organization that's globally wired. I'm sure in our pay line you see a lot of that. And I think that is really to my earlier point that says that we want to take development, into the world in a way that speaks first and foremost to where we come from, what we know, right, and how we want to be seen by the whole world, right? I, in some instances, had showed the relationship between development and culture, right? We want to solve the problems of the communities that we come from, and those communities that we want to see development happening first and foremost, before we can even take anything to the outside world. But that in a way translates to us basically exporting what we are and not merely exporting products, because in products is embedded culture. And I think we have not done a great favor to the world if we have not taken the African culture and the values of Africa. We spoke about Ubuntu, among other things, collectivism, being of service to other, and also just coming from a very deep, background and history of pain, because pain in itself, which is why pain is a natural manifestation, has a place in how the universe works. It could be physical pain, which is alerting you to respond in a particular way to save the whole ecosystem. But even the type of pain that we've come from as Africa, as Africans, right, painful as it is, I think there's some residue that comes from it that, we can blend it into us now going back to hopefully a much more equal and respecting world and make the world a better place. I think in the Bible there's somewhere where it is said that when God saw that people were starting to sin, it devised a means to show or expose to them evil as a way of retraining them, to abstain from sin. So I think all of those things are carried in our cultural background. And as a firm, we're very aware and open and committed to blending that into our products.
Alex Mabunda, the Group Chief Executive at the Consulting Group, Andisa Ramaboga, the Group Chief Advisor, and of course, Mielani Oleni, Group Chief Advisor. Gentlemen, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and you've made me understand why Ntiyiso Consulting will have booked its place 2,000 years from now. Thank you very much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. One thing about pain is that it also makes you realize that you're still alive. We'll continue with these conversations, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you as you watch these conversations. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you from our various platforms as to what it is that you are gleaning and what you're learning from these conversations. Until next time, thank you.